of junk. Just a nice little art book. I know Castlevania Lords of Shadow gets a lot of hate for not being Castlevania enough, but when it came out it looked decent, and this genre is one of my favorites, so I pre-ordered it. I actually pre-ordered the collector's edition as you saw in the beginning, but I liked it. I thought it was a beautiful game, albeit just a little bit derivative. We're going to be messing up the formula a little bit here. I'm going to start with the story from now on because I think it's important to have some context when talking about things like boss fights. This section is going to contain heavy spoilers. If you wish to avoid them, skip to this time code or click the annotation if you're watching on YouTube. The rest of the video will have light spoilers, so if you wish to completely avoid them, you should just leave now. And forever hold your peace. God has abandoned the earth! Well, not totally. But basically the world is cursed, which prevents souls from entering heaven, and the world is being filled with monsters. Gabriel Belmont is tasked by the Brotherhood of Light to make a pilgrimage to the Lake of Oblivion. Gabriel is assisted by an old god, Pan, and reaches the lake. At the Lake of Oblivion, Gabriel meets with his deceased wife, who tells him that the founders of the Brotherhood of Light told her that he must defeat the Lords of Shadow to gain their power to break the curse. His wife disappears, and Zobek, another member of the Brotherhood of Light, states that there is an ancient prophecy where a pure-hearted warrior will destroy the Lords of Shadow and conquer evil. Zobek tells Gabriel the origins of the Brotherhood of Light, where the founding members found spiritual enlightenment, gained power second only to God, and ascended into heaven. Gabriel first goes to the land of the Lycans and encounters Cornell. Cornell reveals that the founders of the Brotherhood of Light did indeed ascend to heaven, but the bodies they left behind were the evil sides of them. The husks left behind became the Lords of Shadow. Cornell reveals that by killing the Lords of Shadow, Gabriel would also be killing the light side of the spirit and therefore the founding members of his order. Regardless, Gabriel kills Cornell, seals the area with a prayer, and recovers an artifact, a portion of the God Mask. Gabriel goes to the land of vampires and fights his way through the castle until he reaches Carmilla. Carmilla gives a very similar spiel to Cornell before Gabriel does her in by impaling her on a fucking building. The final Lord of Shadow is in the land of necromancers. Pan arrives and fights Gabriel as a final test to see if he is worthy to have such powers. Pan is killed, and his blood opens the way to the land of necromancers. Gabriel traverses the twisted landscape and eventually reaches the Lich, who resurrects a giant dragon. Gabriel defeats the dragon, and Zobek arrives once again. Zobek reveals that he was the bad guy the whole time! He reveals he manipulated Gabriel into killing his wife and starting this whole adventure, and that he is the final Lord of Shadow. But before they can fight, Satan himself comes and reveals he was the one who was pulling all the strings, and now he's going to take over the earth! Gabriel kills Satan and sends him right back to heck. Gabriel gets to smooch his wife one last time while wearing the God Mask, and she takes it to heaven, and the game's over. Post-credits, whoa, what? Scene of Zobek and now Dracula Gabriel in modern times. I don't actually have a lot to say about Lords of Shadow's story. I don't think it has a bad story. It does have a very simple story. It's basic stuff, you know, start your quest, go kill the Lords of Shadow, couple of twists here and there. It didn't need to be deep or complex for that to happen. I will say that I think the reveal that Gabriel killed his wife Marie and also Claudia with the Black Knight is really poorly handled. It's completely out of the blue. There's just no foreshadowing of it, and there's no indication that Gabriel would do it or even could have done it. There are hints here and there with Zobek being evil as he's the narrator and he starts getting a little crazy towards the end, and that's fine, but the whole Gabriel thing I just didn't like. Again, I guess it's alleged that Zobek mind-controlled Gabriel, but even then, I think it's poorly handled. It really adds nothing to the story. It probably would have just been better to have Zobek have killed them by himself, and I think it would make a little more sense overall. I think the post-credit scene, the ending where Gabriel is in modern times as Dracula would have been better as kind of like a what-if scenario rather than the actual start of the sequel. But we'll get into that more in the next video. I just don't really have a lot to say otherwise, besides it's kind of needlessly bloated out with a lot of characters and content that really adds nothing to the overall plot. Lords of Shadow is pretty shameless in the games that it is clearly inspired by. The combat is very comparable to God of War. You've got the combat cross, which behaves very similarly to the Blades of Chaos. The camera is very similar to God of War as well. It's more cinematic rather than functional and is often zoomed up far too close in my opinion. It also often has a strange angle when fighting enemies one-on-one, which can make fights more difficult since it makes dodging significantly harder. It's very inconsistent and the camera is constantly changing from one fight to the next. A few bosses are very much inspired by Shadow of the Colossus. It's no secret that I'm not a huge fan of Shadow of the Colossus, so I think these are easily the worst parts of the game. There's 3, and they are by far the longest encounters in the game for no reason other than it's an epic scale. They aren't good, they aren't fun, and they just really had no place in Lords of Shadow. There's also quick time events, which I'm not a fan of, but it's just kind of accepted as the norm, but again, they're bad and worthless to the overall experience. Lords of Shadow has a lot of systems going on in the combat alone. Your standard attacks are just like other action games, normal and strong, except in Lords of Shadow you got directed and wide attacks. The wide attacks are really weak, but hit in a very large area around you. They're almost so weak that they're not worth using. Directed attacks are almost always the preferred method, but I usually use the directed, wide combo for most of the game since it's very easy to cancel and roll out of. You have sub-weapons, like in every other Castlevania. They usually are useful against certain types of enemies. Silver daggers are strong against lichens, and holy water is very good against vampires. You also have fairies, which act as a distraction, and they're used for some very light puzzle solving. And finally, the crystal, which summons a sexy demon that does a huge amount of damage to everything on screen. Magic is kind of strange in Lords of Shadow. It's definitely not traditional. Instead of being like a big spell that does a lot of damage or something cool, magic instead buffs your basic melee attacks. Light magic causes your successful melee attacks to heal you, and shadow magic greatly improves your damage output. You have separate bars for light and shadow, so you can use it quite frequently. While magic is active, some of your sub-weapons also get buffed. Shadow causes daggers to explode on contact, and light makes holy water give a damage shield, and fairies, they just blow up, which is kind of hilarious. They also introduce a new mechanic where if an enemy is using light magic, you need to swap to shadow magic to damage it, and vice versa. It's not really explored much besides 2 bosses, really. Then there are some more advanced combat systems in place. There's a combo meter where you build it up from hitting enemies, and once it's full, when you hit an enemy, they spew neutral magic orbs that you can absorb as either light or shadow magic by clicking in the sticks. Getting hit completely breaks the meter and resets it to 0. I found it very difficult to build up the meter because it takes a very long time to build up, but I was able to do it on certain bosses like Olrox. It's very hard to keep the meter going for a long period of time since it's very easy to get hit in Lords of Shadow, usually because of the camera angle. Then there's some other weird stuff. There's a monster riding system where you need to use your barbed chain on the combat cross to subjugate giant trolls to break down doors or giant spiders to cross webways. You got some standard stuff, you got unlockable combos, the ability to power up your combos and abilities. Shards to upgrade your health and individual magic meters are usually found on Brotherhood of Light members that are hidden throughout the game. You can find upgrades to the capacity of your sub-weapons. A lot of those require you to backtrack to previous levels with new gear you unlock throughout the course of the game. There's just a lot in Lords of Shadow, and it didn't feel like it really needed to be in there. It often feels like it's too busy or it's trying too many different things. It really feels like you needed to drop a few of those mechanics entirely since nothing gets really fleshed out and focused on. But there is one key difference from other games in the same genre which makes Lords of Shadow stand out.
Yeah? What's the difference? Presentation!
Lords of Shadow shines in its presentation and attention to detail. It's a beautiful game. It has an amazing soundtrack. Even the minute details of the menus are just beautiful. I'm just going to show you some commentary-less boring footage of menu traversal, the bestiary, some cutscenes, narration, architecture, and music just so you get a gist of what it is.
One who will deliver a message without any mercy. Olrox, meet Gabriel Belmont and his vampire killer.
They tasted so good. Very good nights.
He told me you'd come. He does it to torment me.
Your people perished while you hid behind the one thing that could have saved them. You don't deserve to call yourself a man of God.
Gabriel.
No, it's mine. You can't take it.
there is a need far greater than yours.
I think most of that footage speaks for itself, and really showcases how great the attention to detail is in Lords of Shadow. It really stands out above the crowd. I'll just throw this in because it feels really out of place. I like Gabriel's voice actor, Robert Carlyle, and I think he does a good job, but every time he's doing a grunt, it sounds totally out of place, like it's done by someone completely different. Here's a grunt montage just to show you. So I think it sounds like a different actor entirely, which is quite jarring when you're going from conversation or exposition with a Lord of Shadow followed by a fight scene and there's these grunts. Patrick Stewart acts as the narrator and does a phenomenal job. The loading screens for levels can be on the long side, and I found myself waiting well past the loading finish because Patrick Stewart was still narrating the chapter introductions. His final scene, he hams it up as much as possible, and you just know he's having a great time. There are some nice concessions that the game makes which reduces the difficulty quite a bit. Some of the puzzles are on the harder side, but you can usually forgo the bonus you get for completing it for the solution, or at the very least, a very useful hint. I like the idea of rewarding completion of the puzzle without the hints because it incentivizes figuring out yourself while still giving you an out if you're stuck. Most bosses are phase-based, and those phases come complete with checkpoints. This means for pretty much every boss, you just need to get to the checkpoint, then you can safely die, and get an HP and magic refresh. It's not a full heal if I remember right, but you do get enough to get by. I honestly don't remember what I struggled with the most. I know I died at probably every boss at least once, but since you can kinda checkpoint hop like I said, it's not that difficult. Honestly, the first Titan fight was annoying, but maybe not necessarily hard. Same with all the other Titans, really. I honestly don't know. I died a reasonable amount of times, but it never felt hard. The most difficult part, honestly, is probably just slogging through most of the game. Lords of Shadow is long. At least it feels really long. It's pretty much on the dot 13 hours. That's on the longer side for modern games, but there's something about it that makes it feel very drawn out. I wouldn't say Lords of Shadow has horrible pacing, but it definitely has issues with pacing. Getting through Agharda to Cornell takes a single chapter, then there are multiple chapters of working towards Carmilla. It really feels far too long. Carmilla's area with the vampires is the most Castlevania area, which may be why the game emphasizes it so much. I just wanted to get on with it, since there's a lot that I would consider useless fluff in Lords of Shadow. A few large sections from pretty much every chapter could have been cut, and Lords of Shadow would suffer no real detriment. You've got the Chupacabras, which do nothing but force you to backtrack in an annoying game of hide and seek. You've got stuff that's basically totally fluff. The Crow Witch is useless to the overall plot, and a lot of areas are just meaningless to everything. You can make the argument that it's kind of world building, but at the same time, I don't buy that. By the time I killed Carmilla, I was basically totally done with the game, and there was still another third to go. The last areas are very needlessly drawn out with confusing and precision-heavy teleport puzzles, and another boring Shadow of the Colossus-inspired encounter as a final padding to the game. It has issues with pacing, but overall, it's pretty good, and that's not to say that I didn't enjoy the whole thing. The best parts of Lords of Shadow are its details. The graphics, sounds, voice acting, the presentation overall is phenomenal. Patrick Stewart's narration is probably my favorite part of the whole game. He should definitely be narrating more stuff, it'd be great. There are some segments which have some humor, which is great. There's a section when you're in the sewers and you're trying to open a door and some skeletons are sneaking up on you. Same thing with when Gabriel is sneaking into the kitchen and the Metal Gear theme plays. It's just a fun little thing. In terms of the game, it can be satisfying to fight certain enemies, but I found many unfun. The large skeletons can feel far too powerful, and a few of the lesser bosses are just straight up boring to fight, so it's a totally mixed bag. My major complaints about Lords of Shadow are just that it needed a lot of fat cut. Large sections of the game could have and probably should have been removed. Anything with the Chupacabras are a waste of time. A huge amount of build up to Carmilla could have been removed to no detriment. Every Titan, Shadow of the Colossus encounter could have been completely pulled, again, to no detriment. That also goes for a lot of systems with the combat. The magic system isn't particularly fun to use. It basically comes down to if you need to heal, you turn your light magic on, otherwise you spam shadow magic as frequently as you can. I don't think you needed monster riding or the neutral magic orb systems at all. They just don't feel well developed enough to really add anything. You kind of just use the monster riding when it's totally dictated to you, and you never really get a chance to use it outside of those sections. I said it earlier, but I think it's just too busy. There's just too much going on. You could have tightened up everything in Lords of Shadow just a little bit, and it would have been a much better game. I think Lords of Shadow is definitely worth checking out for its amazing presentation. The attention to detail is by far its greatest asset. There are great voice actors who perform well, there are some beautiful environments and architecture, and the music always enhances the experience. The book that acts as your menu is very well done, and the little animations for Gabriel's moves are just a great touch. The artwork in the book is phenomenal, it's great. The gameplay is what I would consider acceptable, nothing great, but nothing too annoying or bad to really detract from the experience. It's definitely derivative of other games, which makes it feel a bit lazy at times. My one major criticism is that it just runs a bit too long, and definitely needed to have some stuff left on the cutting room floor. Overall, I liked it a lot. I was very hopeful for Mercury Stream to take what they learned from Lords of Shadow and refine it into something really special for the sequel. I was wrong. So very wrong.
But there's something different about you. You seem good somehow.
What?
I thought I took care of that boy a long time ago. He has inherited all of your worst traits, don't you think? Who the hell are you? I am the blood that runs through your veins. I am the dark shadow that chills the hearts of men as you pass. I am the fury